Companies move to where they are treated best, and that's going to create job wins or losses for different states.
So this is something I think we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive on soon, because there was a very, very interesting expose or documentary about why Dutch Brothers left Oregon. So Dutch Brothers, you guys probably know, the coffee place, is from the Oregon area, and they expanded there, and they moved to Arizona, Tempe. So it's big news here, of course, but it was the largest real estate lease of the year last year, right? They moved. You imagine that they moved from the state that they grew from, right? And so there's a whole piece about why, right? And it was all about being able to attract employees and capital, and so Oregon's getting all this negative press as a result of their stores, obviously the crime and all that kind of stuff, and just the actual customers, but also the employees don't want to move there because of all the stuff, right? That's happening, and they don't feel safe, and on and on and on and on and on. And by the way, don't shoot the messenger here. This has happened. And the president, CEO, founders are all talking about why they moved. And it doesn't just stop with Dutch Brothers. And so why would we be bringing this up? Because there's massive real estate implications as a result of this, right? So one, it completely hurts Oregon, obviously. When you have a clearly there's people that are not going to move to Arizona for sure that work there. That is a fact. But that's irrelevant. They're going to have to find a job somewhere else. So what does that do? Potentially, it raises unemployment there if they can't find another position. If they can, then it doesn't. But that would assume that other employers are moving to Oregon right now. But regardless, there's a bunch of people that did move to Arizona. And what does that do? In a positive way, so negatively hurts Oregon, positively hurts Arizona, in this particular case, Tempe. Not that everyone moved to Tempe, but that is where the corporate headquarters are. So the people that move, they're now here. And what do they get? They get lower priced housing. They get a little friendlier political climate. They get less tax. And there's a whole calculation in this documentary. It's fascinating. And so I was telling Danille, I go, this absolutely puts pressure on single-family housing. It puts pressure on rentals. It puts pressure on restaurants. It puts pressure on enrollment to schools. It puts pressure on everything. When you have a company like that relocating somewhere, it puts
pressure.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to dig more into this, I think. This is a very, very interesting article that actually, it's a whole thing on, was it on YouTube?
Well, and people make this so political, right? But you have to understand that currently Arizona has a blue governor, and so does Oregon.
Yeah,
so it's really,
they're both Democrats.
Yeah, it's not really just a political issue. There's
cost of living.
Yeah, well, there's other issues. So one of them is tax, right? Because tax is a big deal for businesses, and there's two things with tax: high tax and also unstable tax. So not knowing what the tax is going to be.
When you have positive population growth coming into an area and you're building and you're developing, there's tax dollars being spent from people. They're going there, like even as silly as just vacation, like, there's hotel tax and rail car tax and all that stuff. All that stuff pours into the city in a positive manner. Same thing, if there are people moving there, then they're getting their share of tax from the home builders and the real estates and all that stuff. That's, when an economy is booming, it's just like anything else. The people are the revenue, they are the income. Okay, when it goes the other direction, what you have is you have a fixed expenses to run, let's say, the city of Portland. There's no flipping way that they're cutting back on. You know what? We're losing people. Our income's going down. We're gonna trim our fat. We're gonna have to adjust on the expense. Period. It just doesn't happen, right? The reality is, you have lower revenues in a city, and so what do? As you would We need to continue to tax the people. We need to raise the property taxes. We need to raise the sales tax. We need to get our share of tax from Dutch brothers.
Mm-hmm.
That's
no
what,
tax breaks.
Yeah. So again, like the people that are left standing that are trying to be loyal to a state are the ones that are getting penalized. And that's what's actually happening. And that's what they finally threw up their hands and they said, enough is enough.
Well, because a lot of states give tax incentives to businesses because, you want a business in your state because to your point, it helps everything. It helps give people jobs. It helps with the tax situation. It helps commerce. It's just all around good. So when you give tax breaks, that attracts businesses. So if you're upping taxes and penalizing them and increasing them and giving them no breaks, something has to give, I mean, the point of business is to make money. So you have your, what you want to do, but then what you have to do.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about this documentary is it's all very explained. I mean, they're pretty much putting their palms up and being very transparent with, their costs. And by the way, here's the interesting thing. They donated their corporate offices to a nonprofit. Like literally. Now, I'm sure that was for a tax purpose. Don't get me wrong, but they're not going back.
No.
When you donate your corporate offices to a nonprofit, you're not going back.
But I think, too, is the tax predictability because, businesses do plan out 5 years in advance. They don't run like a normal person where it's month to month or year to year. They need some stability in order to be able to expand, grow, know their budget. And if a state can't give them that, then they can't expand. They can't plan. And I think that that's a big thing on these states that people are moving to is there's a lot of incentives. Like, we're not going to raise your tax for X amount of years. We're not going to do this. That way they can actually have a game plan versus flying by their seat of their pants every year. Because one thing I can assure you is that Dutch brothers didn't move to Arizona with no guarantee, because if they move and then next year is going to be different, they just moved their whole company, spent a bunch of money, donated their buildings. So they had to have some assurances of the set period of time where they can
for
predict.
sure. I mean, yeah, you don't just, randomly do that. Like, this is years in the process for sure. They're coming down here. They're looking at space, which is a huge issue, right? Like you can't move a big company like that down. And I love this story, right? These are a couple of entrepreneurs. I think they started in the Grants Pass area with basically a coffee stand, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the American dream. It's a fantastic story. And it's a travesty that a company like that leaves the state that they started in my opinion. And this is not a unique story. There are lots of stories like this, and Danille and I are just starting to crack the surface on this. Not because of the politics, not because of whether it's blue or red, not because of anything other than what is it like for a company to have to compete in these different states? And if they have a choice, and they do, to attract better employees, to have a better price on the housing, to have affordable housing, to have a better climate, to have better safety, have a better police force, have lower crime, all those things are important if you're trying to crush it as an employer. Now, obviously, Dutch Brothers, the individual coffee stands, are not going to be pulled out of Oregon because their goal is to go nationwide. But the corporate office leaving is a huge red flag.
Well, those are the most expensive jobs. I mean, those are the most jobs that pay the best.
That's another good point. Right? Yeah, like these are corporate office employees, people that are actually growing the business. So traditionally, those would be higher paid than somebody working at a Dutch Brothers at one of the coffee stands, of course. So typically a little bit older, typically maybe college educated, not always, but you kind of get the point. So the people moving to Arizona, to your point, they're not going to be really renters. They're probably going to be buying homes. And so what does that do to Tempe? It actually helps. I mean, if you own there already, it helps. But if you're trying to buy there, it actually disrupts it a little bit.
So let's look at other items, though, because it's not just about tax. So this is a big one, is aggressive labor mandates. So this is a big opposition between the left and the right, typically. But to our point is, like, Arizona is still left. But the big point of it is the rapid minimum wage increases. So we have seen minimum wage keep going up, keep going up, keep going up. Well, there comes a breaking point. I understand that everyone wants minimum wage workers to be paid more, but it's not that simple. That's just one part of the equation. The other part is the business has to be able to afford for them to pay more. And then right now you have AI competing with that. When you go into businesses, a lot of times now it's hard to get help because they hardly have any staff there. And all of this is because of that minimum wage requirement.
Well, I'll tell you a great story. I was at my mom's birthday this weekend, and my sister was there, who owns a restaurant and in Washington State. And I'm sitting there, obviously with my brother and Kyle, my son, and his girlfriend. And his girlfriend was a server in Arizona. And they were just having this conversation. And I said, how much is minimum wage in Washington? I think my sister said it was like $17 or $18 an hour for minimum wage. And my son's girlfriend was like, what? That's so much more than I was paid recently as a server. And so we figured that my sister has to pay like $10, $12, $14 an hour more per person for a server per day, per hour, right? So the actual cost is so much more. Now, why is that? So we started getting this very interesting discussion, right? And there are reasons that businesses survive, and there are reasons that businesses thrive. And payroll and labor is a huge one. So if you're an employee, you're going, well, we deserve that money. We can't keep up with the inflation. And you're right. I completely get it. But it is also what drives a business to close its doors, because labor is one of the biggest costs. So as the states try to gouge the employer, because call it what you want, but minimum wage is a mandate for employer. Period. That's what it is. So all of a sudden, these employers they start to make decisions, especially when they have 50, 100, 200 employees. So it's a big deal. If you own a business, you guys all know what I'm talking about. So what has to happen? You have to charge more. Like you can't have your labor costs go up without you trying to charge more. And so my sister, she's like, yeah, we have to change our menu all the time. Like, a cup of coffee, or let's just say that should be a few dollars, might be $4. I might have to go to $4 from $3. And then the customers see that. They're not happy. So all of that stuff, guys, that's the other side of it. And so eventually you just start to shake your head and go, this is too hard. I'm going to move to an area that, is a little more business friendly.
But then that affects everything, right? Because then when businesses leave, there's excess rentals, there's no tax coming in. And then where the jobs are going, it tightens up the rental market, it increases jobs, it increases tax revenue. So, property taxes don't have to go up as much, and sales taxes don't have to go up as much, and all of that good stuff. So that's why we always tell investors it's so important to invest where people are going and not where they're leaving.
Yeah. And what happens is the people that are the penalized the most are the ones that are loyal to the state, and they just take on those extra costs because that's all that they have. If a state is the way to monitor whether a state is healthy or not is if it's growing or shrinking. And if it's growing, you're going to have more tax revenue. If it's shrinking, you're not. And so, what happens is they have to pass around. They have to, if it's shrinking by a certain percentage and their budget is going up or staying the same even, then they have to reallocate that to the people that are left. And that's actually what you're starting to see now. And that's precisely why the Dutch brothers left, because their taxes just kept going up and they couldn't attract people to come there for all kinds of reasons, not just the tax piece, but they were trying to grow their business and they couldn't. So this is really something I think we got to watch because it has massive real estate implications. And that's the reason why we're bringing it up. Because as companies move around, even if it's 20, 30, 40, 50 people, which is under the radar, it has real estate implications, and especially now with this aging baby boomers, they have a choice. If they own a business, they have a choice. Well, I'm just going to move it here and see how we do, if they want to keep the business or not. So stay tuned on that.
All right. See you guys next week.